They haven't declared war, but the world is already at war, have you noticed? One September morning, a shipment of advanced ships was intercepted off China's east coast. They weren't weapons, but they were worth more than gold. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, Europe was facing its biggest energy crisis since World War II. Gasoline prices tripled, factories closed, families had to choose between heating their homes and putting food on the table, and all this without a missile being fired. Welcome to the new Cold War. This war has no trenches, it has sanctions. It has no bombs, it has algorithms. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And when you wake up, the price of bread has already gone up. The dollar has fluctuated. Your job is gone. And you don't even know who pushed the button. It's war. But it doesn't feel like it. What's happening in the world? Why are economies collapsing even in times of peace? What are Russia, the US, China, the European Union, and the Middle East doing behind the scenes? And most importantly, why are we ordinary citizens paying the price? While leaders gather in air-conditioned rooms with crystal glasses, millions of people face the chaos they helped create. In Ukraine, a mother walks with her child in her arms, crossing minefields, seeking shelter. In Lebanon, a merchant sells what remains of his ruined shop to buy rice. In Argentina, young graduates flee the country because they see no future. They are not just statistics, they are people, with faces, hungry, fearful, and the question that echoes is brutal. Are we returning to the darkest times in history? This new war is silent, but it's already everywhere. In our pockets, in our decisions, in our fears. It doesn't need tanks, just a supply interruption. One click in Moscow, and the gas stops in Germany. One signature in Washington, and millions are left unemployed in Southeast Asia. One measure in Beijing, and the whole world feels the impact at the supermarket. Everything seems fragile, volatile, flammable. What if this tension truly explodes? What if a new armed crisis emerges? What if Taiwan is invaded? What if Iran is attacked? What if NATO reacts? Or are we already experiencing all of this, but with makeup that hides the smell of gunpowder? This isn't just a war of nations. It's a war of narratives, of ideologies, of interests. A war for control of everything we don't see but feel every day. And while the powerful play the geopolitical chess game, we, the invisible pawns, are the ones being sacrificed. So I repeat, is this already a war? In the next few sections, we'll pull back the curtains, show you what no one wants you to understand, reveal why the world seems on the brink of collapse, even when everything seems normal. But I warn you, once you see what's behind this new war, there's no unseeing it. The seeds of this silent war were planted when the world was still counting the rubble of World War II at Yalta. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin divided continents like a torn map, but they left fissures that never healed. On the periphery of that room of thick smoke were entire peoples who were not even invited to the conversation. The day dawned with flags hastily sewn over, borders drawn with rulers and fear. Decades later, those lines tremble like living scars, and we feel the pain even without seeing the cut. Why doesn't anyone tell us that the present began there, at a solid wooden table, while three men plotted the fate of billions? When the dollar was crowned king at Bretton Woods in 1944, the world traded gold for green paper promises. It seemed like a victory for stability, but it was an elegant trap. Whoever controls the currency controls the pulse of the global economy. Decades later, Nixon tore up the metal backing and turned debt into financial ammunition. Remember the 1973 oil crisis? It wasn't just a fuel shortage at the pumps. It was the discovery that a tap in the Middle East could strangle Wall Street, and while drivers lined up for miles, executives calculated profits on a board that never closed for lunch. Who profited? Who bled? Fast forward to 1991, the Soviet Union collapses like an imploded building, and many celebrate the end of history. But did anyone ask the former workers of Donbass if the party had reached them? Factories without buyers, wages that went up in smoke, local bosses trading hammers for Kalashnikovs. The ideological vacuum gives way to oligarchs who transform natural resources into private empires. The West applauds the conversion to the free market, unaware that a new elite is plotting the return. It was the peace of the victors, but in the icy alleys of Moscow, another game was beginning. Who would sell gas to heat Europe? Who would pay the price? Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, Deng Xiaoping whispered, "To grow rich is glorious," and opened China's floodgates. Special economic zones sprang up like bonfires in a dark night. Workers migrated from the countryside carrying dreams and debts, transforming rice paddies into skyscrapers. In 2001, Beijing joined the WTO, and Western companies moved entire factories to Guangdong in search of cheap labor. It all seemed like a perfect marriage. China exported goods, the US exported dollars, but every container crossing the Pacific carried, hidden within, a monumental imbalance. How long can a scale always tip in the same direction? Then comes 2008. Bad mortgages from American suburbs contaminate banks in Iceland, workers in Spain, retirees in Japan. The global house of cards collapses before stunned television viewers. Governments pour trillions into bailing out institutions too big to fail, while citizens lose their homes and jobs. Beneath this collapse, international trust cracks. Why? Sustain a system that bails out bankers and abandons people. Beijing senses weakness and launches its new Silk Road. Moscow sees a chance to regain its influence. Washington reacts with sanctions. Brussels hesitates. The game is turning again, but this time without an instruction manual. And here we are in 2014. Tanks cross Crimea, and the world awakens to an inconvenient truth: geography still rules. Sanctions emerge like diplomatic bullets. Russia cuts off gas. Europe trembles. Wheat prices soar in Africa. Anyone who lived through the Cold War feels a chill in their spine. Only now there are more players, more variables, more digital vulnerabilities. A cyberattack knocks out power grids in Kiev. Another shuts down pipelines on the US East Coast. These aren't fantasies, it's history screaming that it never went away. And the question hammering at our temples is simple, brutal, inescapable. How do we escape a labyrinth we ourselves have expanded decade after decade? These days, the Cold War of algorithms and sanctions is knocking on our kitchen door. Consider the grain market. A drone blows up a silo in the Black Sea, and in less than 24 hours, French bread becomes more expensive in Lima, corn disappears in Lagos, and pasta becomes a luxury in Rome. Supply chains that seemed eternal are shattered by a tweet, a stranded ship, a boycott decided in an office in Washington or Beijing. The local grocer doesn't understand geopolitics, but feels the blow when a bag of flour doubles in price. He passes on the costs, the neighborhood complains, consumption drops, the cash register empties. In this new war, the first shot is invisible. It's the falling graph on the bank app, the notification of a declined card, the empty shelf. And no one raises an alarm because there are no bombs or sirens, just silence and inflation. This is how conflict enters our lives, without uniforms, without headlines, but with the force of a hurricane that shatters dreams and budgets before we even notice the sky darkening. Look at the fuel pump. When OPEC Plus cuts production in retaliation for sanctions, the barrel of oil explodes and becomes a chain that ties truck drivers to the side of the road, airlines to the ground, and parents in endless lines at gas stations. In Jakarta, motorcycle couriers turn off their engines because gasoline has weighed too heavily on profits. In Detroit, factories suspend shifts because plastic has become expensive. In Nairobi, generators shut down and hospitals turn off their lights. Official figures speak of market volatility, but the real word is pain. The pain of being out of work, the pain of choosing between medicine and transportation, the pain of selling a motorcycle to pay the electricity bill. And meanwhile, shareholders applaud record profits from oil companies that trade barrels as if they were chips in a global casino. The contrast is obscene. Dividends that fuel yachts, empty tanks that empty lives. This is the painful present. A handful decide the tap, and billions feel the water or thirst. What's the distance between a board of directors and the pump the gas station attendant is holding? Almost none. 10 seconds of speculation. But it's not just food and fuel, it's digital fear. When state-linked hackers break into pipelines, power grids, or central banks, no one sees the fire, but they feel the blackout. In Sao Paulo, ATMs crash. In Berlin, traffic lights flicker. In Manila, hospitals lose medical records. A line of code becomes a silent atomic bomb. The engineer on duty rushes to restart servers, while diplomats exchange accusations that never reach the Hague tribunal. And us, we stand on the corner with no traffic lights, stuck in a traffic jam that wouldn't exist if there were real dialogue. In this war, the soldier wears a hoodie, the rifle is a keyboard, and the battlefield fits into a data center. Who wins? Those who profit from selling antivirus software, firewalls, and cloud contracts. Who loses? Those who need Wi-Fi to schedule appointments, pay bills, or talk to their mother in the countryside. When the screen goes dark, we realize that stability was a luminous illusion sustained by fragile cables. How many seconds of blackout separate civilization from chaos? Scary to imagine. There's also the exchange rate bomb that silently explodes in the pockets of indebted countries. When the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to curb domestic inflation, the Chilean peso melts, the South African rand fluctuates, the Brazilian real plummet, investors flee, currencies bleed, and external debts swell. The economics professor explains it in colorful graphs. But the fisherman in the Caribbean understands the price of styrofoam. The seamstress in Dhaka feels it in the value of her thread. The student in Istanbul notices the bitter and expensive coffee, and while finance ministries light candles for a monetary miracle, credit rating agencies decide who deserves to pay less or more for dreaming. No tank has crossed a border, yet. The sovereignty of entire nations is undermined by an acronym, AAABB, junk. Do you know what junk is? It's when your future becomes disposable in the eyes of those who have never set foot in your neighborhood. If your grade drops, medicine becomes more expensive, school lunches shrink, and the asphalt disappears. This is how you win a war without shooting, pressing keys in glass towers, far from the crying that echoes in the alleys. And where there is pain, there are also those who capitalize on the panic. Hedge funds buy wheat cheaply during the bombing and sell it high when the UN announces a truce. Arms manufacturers see stocks rise every time a foreign minister talks about escalation. Streaming platforms stream apocalyptic series while analysts predict real power outages. Tragedy becomes content, suffering becomes graphics, anxiety becomes premium subscriptions. We are spectators and extras, consuming stories of the same catastrophe we're trying to survive. On the screen, headlines flash like sirens: crisis, collapse, rupture. But the ding that hurts the most is the bank's notification: negative balance. Those who design recommendation algorithms understand fear retains audiences. So fear is fed, fear is sold, fear is profited from. They say that information is power. They omit that misinformation is double the profit. And while we discuss whether the video on the feed is real or fake, inflation eats away at the minimum wage, rent consumes half of our income, life continues to be a minefield with no warning. Signs amid this painful present, voices also emerge that try to weave hope. Farmer cooperatives exchange seeds without going through commodity exchanges. Cities invest in community solar energy to escape gas blackmail. NGOs create refuge networks for displaced families ignored by governments. But each act of resistance is like putting out a fire with a bucket. Noble, heroic, insufficient in the face of global flames. Yet, it persists. Because where there is collapse, there is a breach. Where there is a breach, there is reinvention. The problem is the clock. The speed of destruction seems to outpace the speed of relief. How many bridges can we build before another economic missile detonates them? How many solar health clinics do we need to build before another geopolitical virus closes borders? The scar of today still bleeds, and we hold gauze in our hands, unsure if it's time to stop or if we are already part of the wound. This is the pain of the present, realizing that we patch the boat while sailing in a sea of fire, and yet we must row, because to stop is to sink. Imagine waking up and discovering that the chip inside your cell phone is worth more than minimum wage. This is what would happen if the Taiwan Strait closed. 200 ships stranded in a 300-kilometer corridor, satellites showing red dots that blink like wounds, Chinese destroyers blocking the passage, American fighter jets circling overhead, markets in panic. Semiconductor stocks evaporate in 3 weeks. Factories in Korea, Germany, and Mexico turn off their lights. Production lines for cars, consoles, and respirators simply grind to a halt. It's not a disaster movie, it's an analyst's calculation. 50% of advanced chips come from there. When the military clipboard touches the economic spreadsheet, the whole world feels the blow. And the question sticks in the throat: what is the price of a daily life dependent on island silicon? What if the Middle East reignites? Analysts say a direct conflict between Iran and Israel would shut down a fifth of global oil, close the Strait of Hormuz, and watch the price of a barrel jump to $200 in less than 24 hours. The bomb doesn't have to explode in Houston for the flame to reach your stove. Airlines cancel flights, trucks stop, supermarkets limit purchases. Meanwhile, hedge funds raise champagne glasses over peaking charts. On the floor, the housewife mixes water with beans. This is the possible tomorrow. A religious spark transformed into a planetary recession, proving that today's economy is a web of gasoline, flammable, interconnected, unpredictable. There's also the invisible risk: climate warfare disguised as a natural disaster. Droughts in Texas and floods in Guangzhou reduce harvests, collapse ports, and tear up roads. Food prices soar before farmers can even count their losses. Ripple effects, food instability sparks protests, weak governments fall. And power vacuums attract militias that trade grains as if they were diamonds. According to the World Bank, every 1% increase in the global price of wheat pushes more than 1 million people into extreme poverty, now at 30%. Now imagine that combined with energy crises and unpayable debts. The future doesn't need missiles to implode. It just needs too much rain or too little water. On the financial side, the specter has a name: full decoupling. China and the US are racing to erect tariff walls, cut off access to critical technology, and restrict investment. Stock markets oscillate like paralyzed cardiograms if one of the two giants decides to freeze the other's foreign reserves. It will trigger an unprecedented global banking panic. Imagine payment apps crashing, global markets closing, ATMs imposing a $50 per day limit. Governments will try to print money to calm the streets, but paper won't fill shelves. In the chaos, local currencies turn to dust, and families rush to exchange savings for food, diesel, anything tangible. When trust evaporates, the modern economy dismantles an hours and there's no Ctrl+Z to reconnect wires ripped out by fear. What if? The arms race returns in full force. In Washington, congressmen approve billions for hypersonic missiles. In Moscow, generals display nuclear-powered warheads. In Beijing, engineers test autonomous drones capable of deciding who lives and who dies in milliseconds. Experts repeat that deterrence guarantees peace. But ignore the human equation. More weapons mean more nervous fingers on digital triggers. A software error, a false radar alarm, a hacker attack mistaken for a live round, and the doomsday clock moves forward. 12 hours. The Pentagon calculates acceptable damage. Mothers in every country disagree. Ask yourself, how much is it worth maintaining a balance built on imperfect algorithms? In the less talked about but no less terrifying scenario is institutional fragmentation. When international organizations lose legitimacy, each nation turns inward for fear of betrayal. The WHO becomes a stage for disputes. The WTO drags on in impasses. The UN Security Council is stuck in reciprocal vetoes. Without a reliable arbitrator, trade agreements collapse, environmental treaties become dead letters, and human rights give way to national security. The result? A world that is multilateral on paper and unilateral in practice, where those with power impose, those without obey or disobey, paying in blood. This is not dystopia, it is the photograph of 2025, zoomed in slow motion to what could be 2030. You might ask, what if everything works out? If leaders find dialogue? If green energy replaces fossil fuels? If big data guides fairer public policies? Yes, this roadmap exists, but it depends on courageous decisions now, not tomorrow. It depends on giving up quick profits for long-term stability, on ceding sovereignty in the name of collective survival, on admitting that economic borders can't hold back the smoke from a climate fire. Unfortunately, history shows that we only change when the abyss is close enough to see the bottom. And it's right there, flashing in notifications we ignore. The question then isn't if tomorrow could be worse, but for how long will we pretend there's still a long way to go before we fall? We've reached the edge of the lens, where the image fades into silence. We've seen the price of bread rise because of a drone in the Black Sea, felt the electric fear of a cyber blackout, and heard the hollow sound of coins losing value while we sleep. Now I ask, what still keeps us going? Perhaps the illusion that there will always be someone to stop the bleeding before it becomes a hemorrhage. But what if the person in charge of pulling the emergency brake is distracted by counting votes, profits, or likes? The past has shown that aggregates of individual interests rarely add up to a collective good, and yet, we continue to trust that someone up there knows what they're doing. How long will we hand the wheel over to drivers who only see their rearview mirror? I've spent nights in airports closed due to kerosene shortages, sat with farmers who lost 3 crops in 5 years, and accompanied refugees who traded diplomas for backpacks. Everyone repeated the same phrase, in different languages. Nobody warned us it would be like this. The warning was there. It just wasn't appropriate to publicize it among the headlines of proud optimism. There have always been studies, reports, timid speeches in empty forums saying the house was on fire, but we prefer loud music to drown out the crackling of the floorboards. Now, the ceiling crackles overhead. The smoke is already irritating our eyes. and many still debate whether to open the window, afraid the wind will blow dust onto the furniture. How many fire metaphors do we need before reaching for the fire extinguisher? Some say we are hostages to historical cycles. Empires rise and fall, currencies rise and fall, ideas become ruins. But cycles are not curses, they are repeated choices. When leaders prefer short votes to long projects, when companies view quarterly profits as a moral compass, when citizens trade participation for 15-second entertainment, the circle closes. We complain about the storm, but we forget how many clouds we sell in convenience auctions. The mirror is not comfortable, but it is non-negotiable, and within it appears an uncomfortable question. Are we willing to pay the price of change, or will we continue paying the price of not changing? The futures bill arrives on time even if we try to return it to the sender. I've interviewed economists who see international cooperation as the only possible solution, generals who trust in armed deterrence, activists who rely on community networks, and young people who have given up voting because it doesn't make a difference. Each holds a piece of the puzzle, but no one is willing to give up their own frame to complete the picture. We prefer to build walls and then wonder why the light doesn't shine through. And in this theater of walls, the word humanity becomes a tired cliché repeated at conferences sponsored by banks that invest in landmines. Hypocrisy, perhaps, or just chronic myopia. We see the planet as a chessboard of borders, when in reality it has always been a fragile raft sailing the same sea. If it sinks, there will be no first class saved, so what's left? What's left is what doesn't fit into graphs, the stubbornness of hope. I saw doctors improvising ICUs and shipping containers during the war. I saw a teacher teaching in a square after the earthquake. I saw neighbors sharing bread when the supermarket closed. Resilience doesn't pay dividends, but it prevents total collapse. Still, hope without action is just anesthesia. We need to transform indignation into a budget, solidarity into public policy, denunciation into a social pact. The algorithm that swallows our clicks can also amplify solutions if we demand it. The capital that finances weapons can accelerate clean energy if we demand it. Sound naive? To ignore this possibility is to sign a fatalistic receipt. Between cynicism and utopia, there is a narrow corridor called responsibility, and it fits into every choice of consumption, vote, sharing, silence, or cry. I close with an open wound. We are the first generation with enough data to predict catastrophe, and, perhaps, the last with time to prevent it. The new Cold War is no longer a metaphor. It's the real temperature on the electricity bill, the bitter taste of inflation, the dead pixel on the world map where lives disappear. You can turn off the screen, but the conflict doesn't turn off with it. It waits for the next purchase, the next report card, the next rainless summer. Ask yourself before you sleep, what story will we tell the unborn? That of a world that repeated old mistakes to the breaking point, or that of a society that stared into the abyss and decided to build a bridge? The time to decide is not someday, it is now, while the clock ticks and the echo of our choices can still be heard. Tomorrow, perhaps, the noise of consequences will be so loud that not even regret will find room to speak.